Evanthia Dimara is a recent assistant professor in our department in the visualization and graphics group led by Alex Talea. She received her diploma in computer science from the National and Kapodistrian University of Athens in Greece, and her master's and PhD from INRIA, France. Then she completed a postdoctoral training in University of Sorbonne in Paris and later in University of Constance before coming to join Utrecht. Evanthia's research focuses on decision making and how to help people make unbiased and informed decisions alone or in groups. And she's especially interested in the kinds of decisions for which the current decision support systems, models, and people's heuristics tend to fail. So her work combines graphic design, interaction design, and data analysis for interactive data visualizations. And today's talk will be entitled Opportunities and Challenges for Data Visualization to Support Decision Making. And we're very happy to host her. Evanthia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Albert. So, hello also from me to everyone. Thanks for the nice intro. So yes, this presentation is about me telling you a few things about, first of all, my domain of research, then a bit of my topic I mostly focus on, and what are the challenges along the way. Hoping mainly that this will help me connect with all of you, have discussions and collaborations, why not? So, now let me progress. Good. Slides are good. So, information visualization, which is my domain of research, I would say is a newly introduced thing in Utrecht University, like with Alex Talea. Correct me if I'm wrong, Alex is about 3 years kind of a newly created team. So I would not assume that everybody knows what information visualization is about. So I will start by saying you a few things first about the domain. So usually when I teach, let's say, visualization, one question I make to my student, first one was, what is data visualization? What do they think it's data visualization? And usually the students, when it comes to the option C, they fairly recognize a number of known charts that we use everywhere in the newspapers and in all places. They also may understand that their visualizations can be more complex than that. They can be about more elaborated systems, or can be a bit more sophisticated and more creative in the design visualizations. And then we have the example of, is it a website, a visualization? So students might say here, yeah, well, it's interactive and it's visual, but where is the data? Or is it, and this is a topic of user discussion, is this data enough to call something a visualization or not? And when we discuss the option A, which is a plant, it's okay, that's visual, but it's not interactive, and it's not, where's the data on it? And then I'm showing them this image, which is another type of plant called a Garden of Eden, air pollution data, and its plexiglass box represents a city. Here we have New York, Ottawa, and the concentration of ozone is controlled in real time to reflect the current pollution level in the city. So that is just to give you an idea that the notion of visualization can be really broad. Usually we are used to think of it in terms of desktops, computers, and applications, and visual analytic tools. But the main point is the data and the mapping of those data in something that we can perceive. So now, if I want now to position a little bit visualization to what we do in the department, we have two branches. We have the branch of data science and human-computer interaction. So if I want now to see the overlap between what we do and data science does, there is a lot of overlap, definitely. If I want to differentiate a little bit about what visualization is about, is that it's not only about visualizing data during the workflow of a data analysis and then see a few patterns. It's also about the study of the interface design, so how we can design the interface in an optimal way. And once And one very important component is the humans on the way. Of course, data science is also about humans and it's made for humans. But what I mean by that is that in information visualization, there is this assumption that if a data problem can be fully automated, you do not need any visualization. What that means is that we assume that somewhere in the process, maybe not in whole process, you have a place where human judgment is needed. And you have to design in a way to make this judgment be correct and truthful all the way. So we need also, that to say, we need the study of human beings to be able to build those tools. Now, if I want to compare a little bit visualization with HEI that we have in the department much longer than visualization, there is again a lot of overlap. We have the humans, we have the interactive systems. What if I say, if we can define a differentiating factor, if we can call it like that, is the data component here. So the type of interfaces we design are, let's say, data oriented. And this imposes a number of restrictions for that interface. So we have to be aware of the inherent properties of the data, of data analysis principles. So to say, let's say, even if a user is super happy having a visualization that shows a number of, pleasant charts, but these are misleading and they don't truthfully represent what the data is about, visualization researchers don't like that, right? We have an independent commitment to the data apart from pleasing or satisfying the needs of the user themselves. So the commitment to the data truth, if I can call it like that. So now if I want to be completely honest with you, there are also a lot of other domains that overlap and we borrow from and we build upon. Psychology, from vision and cognition and social sciences and AI and stats and communication and algorithms. We also dealing many times with domain-specific data problems that imposes a number of other domains that go on the way. Medical data, forecast data, software data, physics data, finance data. So this is sometimes how visualization research feels like. It's because there is a level of multidisciplinary challenges that we deal in our daily research. We have to deal with domains that we have to get a grasp to be able to make data relevant visualizations and effective ones. So yeah, and there are many kind of different ways of doing this type of research. So we have, you see here, the psychology type of works. We have run experiments to see how people react to different visual representations. We deal sometimes with those people in the wild. We follow them in their work environments. Sometimes we start from interesting data sets that we want to analyze. Sometimes we focus on design innovations, how we can make different and new visualization techniques. We're also dealing a lot sometimes with real world problems. There's data involved and people have to solve them. And now if I want, let's say, to tell you a little bit about what I do within that workflow, yes, there is a human being. And in my case, most of the times in my research topic, this human being tends to be a decision maker. Now, what I mean by that, yeah, so let's say in our department, we have also the professional decision makers. One type of decision makers are people who repeatedly in their workflow have to make decisions and they're trained to make decisions in their workflow. In our department, this is Johan Uring, right? I get the deans, I don't know. So there are people who repeatedly, this is their job to make decisions. And then we have the incidental decision makers who are, in a way, all of us, right? We don't make decisions per second, but we do have important decisions when we want to buy a house, when we want to hire a student, when we want. So it's also about casual decision makers. The difference between us and the professional ones, if we can call them like that, is that we don't do it so often, at least at a large scale. And maybe we're not essentially trained for that, right? There are people who are trained in order to make effective and complex decisions. So now so what you may think when you see that is that, yeah, seems like a pretty good topic for visualization, right? Seems like it should be good. Like we have decision making is all about ill-defined problems. That's great. And decision making is an ill-defined problem. We have a human in the loop. We have decision making has to be data driven. And it seems like, it should be very much and very well explored. And visualization should be all about like making those decisions with data. Now, and this is actually what we also read in common visualization books. So if you see those seminal scholarly books of visualization, even if we start from the very early ages, Bertin in 1983 said that the goal of visualizations is to enable the decision maker to discover what should be said and done. And now if we want to go even the most recent scholarly books of visualization, Colin Ware in his excellent book says that the goal of most visualization is decision making. And what you might be, surprised to know is that all those cool references about decision making in all those seminal books mainly stop at the introduction level. And what I mean by that, it's all about motivating the visualizations for decision making. But when you dig inside the chapters, you cannot find like frameworks or specific studies of how we should be designing for people who make decisions, how people are making decisions. So we don't have a sort of theoretical guidance of this domain about decision making inside the books. And even if you want now to explore this in the scientific articles of visualization, and you can see all those represent some very prominent venues of visualization, and we search for all of those with the word decision in their abstract, and we can also, split those into main categories. We have the design kind of papers, the blue ones, who represent new tools and systems of visualizations, and you have also the red ones, who are more theoretical type of papers, empirical. And you're going to see here a nice trend that's the more we progress to 2020, we see more and more decision-making interests, right, in the papers. But if you dig inside those works, what you'll find is that there are very, very few, very limited empirical findings, evaluation guidelines, frameworks. It's all about, perception and analysis, how people see data, how people analyze data, but not really about how people make decisions over data. And also the view, when you see the tools that we analyze, what you're going to see is that there are a number of visualization tools that we say it's to support decision making, but when you see the actual way that those tools are evaluated, what you will see that in the quantitative evaluations, only 6% of those ask people to actually test any sort of decision-making task. I mean, to give the tool to a person and tell them, make a decision, even a simple one, even a binary decision. So this is very limited. So we don't really test them based on their effectiveness of how well they actually help people make decisions. And even if you go to the qualitative evaluations, that in principle should be easier to the extent that we don't need to define a ground truth, what is a good decision, right? You give the tool to a person and you ask them to make a decision, and you document the experience of doing that. Even there, we have a very limited amount of works that they actually test that. And on top of this, the people that we recruit to evaluate our tools, the participants, are almost never decision makers themselves. So it's that analysts, they have other type of profile, and I'm going to talk about this later on. So, yeah, so my goal, vision, the kind of thing I want to do in visualization is to be able to, in a way, enrich this branch of knowledge, like to create an independent and well-informed branch within my domain that will help us tackle this particular act of decision making. And now how I think we can do that This is my favorite triangle. I put it also in created this triangle, and I put it in our website in the department. So I think first what is needed is that we need to understand very well how people should, could, and do make decisions. And to do that, we need to build foundations within our domain of visualization, and we need to borrow knowledge from other domains. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So we have decision theory, management, economics. There are a number of domains here that traditionally visualization doesn't have a lot of overlap with so far. We want also then to be able to make tailored data interfaces. And I'm talking both about visual design, but also about interaction design to support the act of decision making. And then, in the end, decision makers don't have much time, and they have a lot of data sometimes, and they do want automation. They don't want to do everything manually. So it's also of crucial importance within all this environment to be able to balance human-machine symbiosis properly, right? To be able to support mixed initiative environments, which in our case now is more about AI and machine learning. All those should be properly integrated in the game. Yeah, so how to do all that? Baby steps. First, one thing that I'm mostly known in my domain has to do with cognitive bias research. So, and if I want to put this in a decision-making context, that has to do with the systematic mistakes that we made when we're making decisions with visualized data. So I leave a couple of references here. So, and don't worry, by the way, I'm going to share my slides in the end. So don't worry about references or anything. I will just share everything with you. Recently, I had a new PhD student, Emre Rao, and Emre is also studying, he's doing also psychology kind of works, if I can call them like that, and Emre is investigating those two, this difference between making a judgment on a visualization versus making a decision with visualization. And also I have another great student, Michelle, who is also working more on the domain of, let's say, design innovation, if we can call it that, who wants to build expressive visualization filters to support multi-attribute choice tests. So I do encourage you to meet them both in the research day. They're both going to have posters there. So feel welcome to bomb them with your questions. They like brainstorming. And also recently with Hannah from the HI department, we started supervising a new student, a master's student, to support clinical decision making. So this is more on the domain of dealing with real world problems, right? So now what I want to talk to you about is what were my observations when I deal with decision makers in the wild. What did I learn from them when I was working with them? Now, what I mean by in the wild, we had a study that we recruited a number of people, CEOs, executives, managers, several types of employees of organizations of many different sizes. And some of them come from education, from healthcare, for profit, most of them actually from commercial environments, government and healthcare all over the world, more or less. And we actually, because we wanted to investigate exactly this difference that I told you about, doing that analysis and making decisions, we have two profiles of participants. We have decision makers in red, and in blue we have data analysts. So and we did a survey on those people about tools and visualization and what do they use in their workflow. One particular finding that stands out, and I don't know if you would find it obvious. I didn't find it so obvious when I was doing it, is that these people reported a number of tools that they're using, anything, not only visualizations, calendars, Slack, or whatever you can imagine in terms of tools, and visual analytic tools. So what are the tools people are using and decision makers are using? So we kind of analyzed all the 940 of them, and we didn't find any tool that actually supports the decision process itself. What I mean, yes, you will use a calendar to help you in some aspect of your decision making about planning your meetings, but a tool that can actually support the whole process from the moment I'm making a decision, how I define my alternatives, how I'm gonna, a tool that supports you all the way, a tool that is specifically designed for that. So we didn't find any of those tools. And I'm not talking about only visualization here, I'm talking about all commercial tools that we analyzed. Another thing that we saw was that, and I was surprised by that, and I'll tell you why, because in my mind, before I do this interview and this survey first and later an interview, I kind of have a stereotype in my mind of the decision maker a little bit. I will admit that the decision maker is a person who doesn't care about data, who doesn't want only simplified versions of information, but they don't like being bothered with truth, or I don't know. There was a small stereotype, I believe, in my that they don't deal with data that much, right? In contrast to the data analysis teams. And what I saw here, in the red here, is that decision makers, at least the ones who came to our study, using a lot of spreadsheets with data, a lot of spreadsheets. And they do have some static versions of this information in the dashboard, so they're exposed to visualizations. And they don't have much interaction, so they don't interact much with those visualizations. And the reason, I mean, and the thing is that they complain about that. So in their qualitative comments, when they were discussing this, they were saying, oh, it's not interactive enough, I want to do a number of operations and I cannot do, I want to grab this and drag that. So we had a lot of requests from decision makers about, wait, that's not interactive enough. And I was thinking, well, we have a lot of interaction in our tools, why those people are complaining? So my interpretation is that they just they're not familiar with more sophisticated visualization tools. They only use simple spreadsheets like Excel. So it's just a familiarity bias. They didn't have a tool, right? So they don't know that interaction is possible. And then we switch from the survey instrument to the interview. So we followed a number of those decision makers to have more into-depth discussions with them. And I asked them a number of interesting questions. I asked them to narrate a difficult past decision they had in their life. I asked them to draw information of that decision to understand the mental model of the decision maker. I asked them to describe the relations, the professional relations with the data analyst team, so how they interact with the data analyst. And in the end, I asked them to describe to me the ideal decision assistant, no matter what this is. Is it a person, is it an AI, is it a magic wand? So, because with those questions, I wanted to trigger to understand what they really need. So I cannot tell you many of the findings now for the sake of time and not to tire you too much. So you can read the paper to see most of the results that we analyzed there. Also, I will focus in a few. So these are a number of insights that we got from those interviews. And those type of insights represent either stuff that we don't do well in visualization, or they represent needs, uncovered needs of decision makers that they don't feel that they are addressed. Not necessarily from visualization, but from their technology that they use in total. So one thing is a lot about group dynamics. So what decision makers explained to me, which sounds a little bit obvious, but I don't know how obvious it is. Yes, decision making is almost, at least on an organizational level, it's almost never in one person situation. It involves iteration from many people. So I had an executive here who was complaining and say, you know what, the best use case for us is to understand the data together, the same data, rather than I have my data and somebody else have their own data. And what I mean by that is that, yes, they gather in a meeting all together, and each one brings its own piece of either visualization or of analysis of something. And this is like, end products with other end products, and they don't get to iterate with the same data together. So yes, it's a group decision making. They all have their pieces of information with them, but they don't have a way to iterate all together over the same information, which signals maybe collaborative decision support in visualization. Maybe it's not so accessible. I don't know. Then there is a very emerging thing about flexibility of data interfaces. It came a lot across the interviews. So it seems that current visualizations do not have the degree of flexibility that decision makers need. And I will read to you a long quote about what a visualization, what a decision maker said to me precisely. He said, visualization is just one little part of the job. How to model a decision process supporting the flow with sufficient flexibility is more important. It is inconvenient to distinguish between the tool itself and how I do the decision process. Yes, I can explore the data, the patterns, which are also important and useful, but that part is more in collecting evidence for my later decision making. But in the existing tools, either you have to program it or you have to do a lot to transform the data. For visualizations, I still use those tools, but for decision making, I draw simple flowcharts. Computers don't give you much advantage over a pen and a paper. It's not about sitting in front of a computer, but have a notebook with me, maybe when I'm eating lunch and I think or talk to people for something. It is about the convenience. Ouch. For us as yeah. And another interesting insight inside this study was that I had 3 different decision makers who they all describe a very similar scenario. So you remember in the beginning I told you that they use a lot of spreadsheets and Excel, and I don't know why they are using those. So I had very similar stories coming from very different decision makers. One from the government, one from the commercial. So it was really, really diverse scenarios, but they all came to the same idea. So they have a group meeting to make a decision. They're using a lot of spreadsheets, simple spreadsheets like the simple version of Excel or similar kind of spreadsheet software. And the reason they do that is because this is the only tool that allows them to play with the values flexibly, do data inputs and do back and forth with the data, which is surprising because it seems that the visualizations, yes, they do allow them to see data and interact with data, but they don't let them play interactively at all levels with the data set, create new criteria, create new data points. So they needed a level of flexibility that visualizations were not able to provide. And as I say, now maybe you think, it's okay, we only have to, add this decision-making case inside the domain. But, decision-making, as I call it, is an iceberg. It's an iceberg of decision-making. And why I say that is because decision-making doesn't really exist. What I mean by that is an umbrella term, a buzzword that we use across different domains. And in each domain, it means something completely different. So, and either I, as a researcher, I have to get to learn all those things, which a lifetime is not enough, or I will need great colleagues, smart ones, who can somehow guide us and tell us about the version of decision-making within their domain, how is this studied and how is it explored. And then my goal is that I will gently collect all that knowledge and transpose it and translate it to my dear visualization colleagues. And that was it, the end of my talk. What I want you to keep is that all these complaints of decision makers are mainly, as we see them, as challenges and opportunities to create new and great tools and knowledge. And we have a way of doing that, and we hope to be able to expand visualization design beyond that analysis objectives to make it tools that can support decision making. And I want to have a lot of questions because I like them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So let's first have a round of applause for our speaker. So